The U.S. military continues to carry out strikes on suspected drug boats in the Eastern Pacific. Officials say the latest mission killed 4 people on board. That action comes amidst bipartisan criticism of the Pentagon over a similar attack in September, during which the military fired follow-up strikes on a boat. A Navy admiral told lawmakers there was no order from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to kill survivors of the original airstrike, but that contradicts reports from the Washington Post. Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat who represents Illinois' 5th District, serves on the House Intelligence Committee, senior member, joins me this morning to talk more about it. Congressman, always good to see you again. It's unclear as to whether the order that came from Hegseth was to kill them all or destroy the boat. And I've heard, and it's been reported, some congressmen on the Republican end seem to say it's kind of an offboarding point for them because they're saying, hey, if they don't want to challenge the president, then destroy the boat would be the order they want to hear.
Right. I mean, first of all, Hegseth's story has changed pretty considerably. The day after, he was taking credit for all this. Then when there started to be negative reaction, he talked about, well, this was the fog of war, or these combatants were still capable of participating. I'm not sure. Obviously, he was taking credit, and now he's, perhaps blaming the admiral for doing this. The fact of the matter is, these people were either civilians, where this is clearly a war crime, or they're combatants in a situation in which they were unable to. There's a French phrase for it, out of combat. And then it would be equally illegal in international law and the own rules that the Pentagon is supposed to abide by. So I think he's uncomfortable at this point in time, but he knows the president's got his back, so they go forward.
This next question has kind of 2 parts to it because you've used the term, many Democrats use the term, this was a war crime. How can you have a war crime when there's been no declared war? And what is Congress doing about that? And secondly, if it's not a war crime because there's no war, then should there be other terms being referred to, such as murder or something, if that's what happened?
Well, if we're not in a conflict, if we're not in a war, then they are civilians. And then it's a war crime for killing civilians. I mean, either way, it's extrajudicial execution. And the fact of the matter that they haven't brought Congress into this raises a whole slew of other issues. We haven't actually declared war in Congress since the Second World War. We have to retake our constitutional privilege here because that is the law. But it also, attacks like this lower the bar. What does this mean for what we can do in the rest of the world? And obviously, it has an impact with how the rest of the world views us in the United States.
Well, it also suggests if one day there's an American boat and the situation were reversed and some other country hit a boat and killed some of our people, I'm guessing the American position wouldn't be to, well, they were told to destroy the boat.
Yeah, and look, we understand how it looks to the rest of the world. There are plenty of propaganda films and real life stories of how the people we were at war with in the Second World War committed crimes like this and how much it was meant to make us dislike those countries. Mission accomplished, and it should have. But now we're doing the very same thing that which we decried so much. It really hurts our standing in the rest of the world. And I think as a result makes us less safe.
So here's a juxtaposition for you. I mean, the president talks a lot about his war on drugs and that's why he's taking all these boats out. And then earlier in the week, he pardons former Honduras President Juan Hernández, who was convicted, not accused, convicted of drug trafficking, just hundreds of thousands of tons of cocaine and all of that. And yet he says, well, that was because it was a Biden prosecution and wasn't fair. I'm sort of curious from your perspective, Democrats are going after that as conflicting with the message of being anti-drug. But I've heard Republicans like Senator Markwayne Mullins who said, I don't know enough about that. It seems that on that issue, Republicans aren't challenging the president. They just don't seem to know anything about it.
Yeah, and we can enlighten them. I mean, this is a person who was convicted for accepting millions of dollars in bribes over several decades. He helped funnel drugs into the United States. This was a cartel led by El Chapo Guzman, right? So he's been seen at sporting events with Guzman. So he was convicted by a jury of his peers. There was no talk of the details of what took place in that trial or the crimes that took place. All we know is he liked the guy and he pardoned him. He was responsible for an extraordinary amount of drugs coming into the United States. There's no worse case of hypocrisy by this president.
Well, there's a lot of reporting that what this is all about is that Trump would like to see Maduro out of power. And again, tying it to the drug trafficking and drug trade. But that being said, if you get this other pardon, then if it's not about drugs, what is it about? If there is a desire to get rid of Maduro, is it about oil?
Well, look, it's got to be pivoting for something. And what else is there of such great interest to the United States? So you would assume it comes back to the blood money that comes from oil all too often in U.S. foreign policy.
I think we had this past week boat, I think it's number 24 that has been destroyed. I've talked to you about what Congress is going to do. You said Congress needs to act. But even along those lines, at what point has Congress had enough? If we're at boats in the 20s, at what point does the leaders of Congress, and I guess it has to be on the Republican side, say we've had enough, we've got to be part of this?
I think you're starting to see some cracks and fissures along the lines of supporting Trump. I think it began in earnest with the Epstein files, where the president knew he was going to lose on that. You're starting to see some of the procedural votes that involved spending bills, where even Diaz-Balart from Florida pushed back against the president. And now in Ukraine, you're starting to see a greater press for a discharge petition for sanctions involving Ukraine, and even secondary sanctions. So you're starting to see cracks and fissures. I suspect Epstein made it easier. I also think that all-important polling about U.S. Civilian confidence or lack thereof in the economy and where it's going.
I do want to ask you about tariffs. I know that's something you're watching closely as well. The president has recently said, basically, we've just been collecting so much in tariffs, we may be sending checks to all Americans. And by the way, we might not even need the income tax in a period of years. So I guess we'll be able to live on tariffs. You must be happy about that.
Yeah, to where it's so. Look, the fact of the matter is tariffs are taxes. They're costing American taxpayers every single day. It's why food costs more. It's why cars cost more. But we've seen the impact right here in Chicago. Small business can afford tariffs less than any. I just met with a group of small businesses in Wicker Park, and they're all saying the same thing. Please shop small. They need a really good Christmas season to survive. What I'm hearing from them is that a combination of the ICE raids and what's taking place with tariffs was worse than COVID. So, florists and other small businesses, they don't have the ability like larger companies to absorb these costs or even to pass them on. And they're getting hit hard.
Yeah, and you have a big company like Costco who's actually suing the government to try and get that tariff money back. SCOTUS is going to rule on this likely in the near future because they took this issue up so fast. You're a lawyer. How fearful are you that the Supreme Court, which has yet to find a reason to limit this president's power, will not stand by him with regard to tariffs? And what's the consequences of such a decision if that happens?
Yeah, look, it would hand a tremendous amount of power over to the president of the United States, which obviously they've done so far. I hold out hope because, as you know, there was some skepticism in the arguments before the Supreme Court that they had some questions about this. If the Supreme Court doesn't do this, Congress must. You've seen the bipartisan basis, they pushed back in the Senate. When that bill came over to the House, Speaker Johnson had to pass a special rule to put that off. So I'd like to think those cracks and fissures that we've seen would apply even stronger when it becomes involving tariffs.
All right, Congressman Mike Quigley, lots more to talk to you about, but that's all we got time for today. So thanks for spending part of your Sunday with me. Have a good rest of the day. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
All right, up next on WGN TV Political Report is City